Welcome to the Pindown, your Detroit Pistons podcast. I'm your host, Wes Davenport from Motor City Hoops and Detroit Bad Boys.
And I'm Blake Silverman, writer for Detroit Bad Boys, covering everything from the Pistons to the NBA draft and the Motor City Cruise.
Blake, we just got to jump right into this because literally we're recording at 6 p.m. on May 23rd, literally 5, maybe 10 minutes before we actually hit record here and go live. We get some breaking news. So, big news for everybody, Pistons fans everywhere. The Detroit Pistons are planning to hire Trajan Langdon from the New Orleans Pelicans to be the new head of basketball operations and lead that quote-unquote basketball vision for the team moving forward. So just a little bit of background on the guy before we get your instant reaction and immediate thoughts, Blake. But Langdon's a former NBA player. He was a first round pick, number 11th overall, played 3 seasons with the Cavs before ended up finishing his career overseas. He spent the last 5 years in New Orleans as the GM under David Griffin, and he did follow David Griffin from the Cavs to the Pelicans when that move happened as well. Prior to that, he was a scout with the Spurs for a few seasons. In 18-19, he was the G League Executive of the Year for the Long Island Nets. So, I mean, a very qualified candidate. He's been around for a while. Seems like he's paid his dues. Blake, instant reaction. What are your thoughts on this hire for the Pistons?
Yeah, and I just have to say it is a very instant reaction because I did not see the Woj bomb until I sat down getting set up, ready to record. So really just flying off, just figuring out this massive news that we've all been waiting for. But I like it. I feel like things have been heading toward this direction, especially when the Wolves advanced. I think we all figured behind the scenes the Pistons were waiting to potentially make a run at Tim Connolly, and I think it was reported through the beat writers and various outlets. So once the Wolves advanced, I figured I would be pretty surprised if the Pistons waited for whenever the Wolves were done to make a real offer at Connolly. And Langdon has been one of the names that was reported a couple weeks ago that he had some fans in house, and going like all the names that were listed, it seemed to me like the team wanted to bring in someone who had a pedigree of roster building. Like they're not looking to take a shot on someone new, like an up and comer, even though Langdon, I think, is a fairly young guy and fast riser among the ranks. But I mean, if you look at the recent draft picks he's made, how he's built that Pelicans roster, like their wing room is full. They maybe have too many wings, and that is something that the Pistons don't have. So if he takes a similar philosophy into drafting players that fit that 3-and-D wing, can shoot the ball archetype, I'll be all for it. Obviously, the interesting thought now is what happens to Troy Weaver. Are there going to be any changes in the coaching office? I think we'll find that out soon. Hopefully this podcast doesn't age poorly and we figure that out very shortly after we record or something like that. But that's where my head's at. I like the move initially, and honestly, it felt like things were heading toward this direction.
Yeah, so a couple things. One, you mentioned it. He is a younger guy. He's only 48. What's kind of interesting about this, at least in terms of the titles, right? So he's going to be the head of basketball operations for the Pistons. Well, in New Orleans, he was the GM under David Griffin, who is the executive vice president of basketball operations for the Pelicans. And it's just, it's kind of funny when you literally get a step up almost into the exact same title somewhere else. And now Troy Weaver currently is the GM. So like you said, we'll see what happens there. You mentioned the last picks that the Pelicans have made. I'm just going to give some of the highlights. So these are obviously just hits. So we're not talking about any of the misses here, though I would note that most of the misses were kind of late second round picks. So, take it or leave it with those. It's not too big of a deal. But so the notable picks from the last 5 years when Langdon's been in New Orleans: Jordan Hawkins last year, Dyson Daniels, Herb Jones, Kira Lewis, and Zion Williamson. And it is noteworthy that I do believe Langdon was part of that front office that executed the Anthony Davis trade that year, right? So he was part of the team. At least my understanding is he was part of the team that did bring in all of those Lakers guys: Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, and one other one that Josh Hart, I think, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So Josh Hart. Yeah, it's really interesting. What, like you said, I'm just so curious now to see what's going to happen here with the rest of this front office, and how far the dominoes fall for all the leadership with the team. The one thing I do want to note before I kick this back over to you is at least our understanding of this hiring process was that the Pistons tapped a search firm. The search firm brought qualified candidates to Tom Gores, and Tom Gores is the one who has interviewed everybody. So you noted that, the Pistons were looking for someone with maybe more experience, something in that light. What we don't know, and what we'll never know, is what each of these candidates brought into that interview. And you have to believe that Langdon brought in the best plan, and it's going to be very interesting seeing that Tom Gores wanted something immediate, some level of immediate improvement. They did just hit rock bottom here over this past season, winning only 14 games. So it's going to be really interesting to watch here how that plan, whatever it was that Langdon brought into that interview, how that's going to shape out here over the next few months as these decisions really become imminent.
Yeah, and before we like dive into, I guess, what it looks like moving forward, and again, you're catching like our raw thoughts with this. We just found out this news right before we jumped on to record, so I've been like flipping through Langdon's like Wikipedia page and stuff. He was drafted in the sixth round of the MLB draft, and like played baseball while he was playing basketball, and I have to read through it more thoroughly, but it said like at the NCAA at the time, like he was playing minor league baseball while he was playing basketball for Duke, which is just nuts to me. So he seems like he has a really interesting background. And yeah, from like an executive standpoint, what he has done in New Orleans, like I think what stands out to me about why we don't know what he said behind the scenes, like you mentioned, or he obviously impressed. But I think he's shown an ability to build a roster that's suited toward the modern day NBA, which like the Pistons haven't really had that. Like we can argue whether Troy and the current front office like have the ability to do so, and that's just not how things shook out. But I think the Pelicans, like, yeah, they went and traded for CJ. They got some lottery luck and they drafted Zion. But surrounding those pieces, and like Brandon Ingram as well is looped into that, like, I feel like they've drafted really well, and they've just brought in pieces that help mold an actual competitive team. Obviously, it hasn't like resulted in contention for New Orleans, but I think the idea is there, and they've at least had some like playoff experience. So I think if there's a similar philosophy for this new age, this new front office for the Pistons, I think you're at least heading somewhere.
The one thing we are going to have to be careful with is that, you look at New Orleans and the relative success that they've had roster building wise, which they have over the past 5 years while he's been involved, Langdon, that is that we don't know how much of that is Langdon, how much of that is
Right.
Griffin, how much is that someone, some other scout within the organization that maybe had the eye for, Herb Jones in the second round, right? Really pounded the table to add him as that draft pick. So we don't know the inner workings of all that. So just need to be a little bit careful looking at the track record in New Orleans. Maybe it was all him. Maybe he had other ideas that they could have been even better, right? That Griffin just didn't end up going with. We just don't know. What I'm going to be really interested to see is that introductory press conference where he's actually going to, presumably outline what he's going to want to do here in the short term. And it does bear mentioning that, yes, he's going to have a connection to David Griffin out in New Orleans. And yes, Brandon Ingram is obviously a big trade candidate that a lot of Pistons fans want to see added. So there's immediate trust there, at least with those two. That could be interesting to follow. Obviously, who knows if anything ever happens, if there's even interest on the part of Langdon to add a guy like Ingram. But if there were, the wheels could be greased a little bit in that capacity. The one thing I wanted to bring up to you, and it's kind of unavoidable now. This is a question from KCP for three, and it's through in the DBB comments, and we just had someone bring it up here in the chat. Yeah, Bobby Buckets. So Trajan Langdon, when he played, his agent was actually Arn Tellem. Arn Tellem, obviously, is a senior advisor or a senior executive with the Detroit Pistons, part owner, has been around for a while. Does that concern you at all? Is that something notable? What are your thoughts on that?
It doesn't concern me. I do understand like the concern, and it's a very valid question. The reason I'm not concerned is I think I've come to the understanding that the great majority of people, and I don't want to generalize, but a lot of people are connected to the Tellems. Like Arn has a crazy basketball experience. He's been around forever. He's represented so many different players over his time. His sons are now like agents as well. So I understand that. But I do think, and I understand the concern. Like we want to make sure we're hiring the right person for the job, maybe just not the person that has the best connection. I do think there is an element of it as like, I mean, any job, like no, not even in basketball, like the connections help. So I don't know. It doesn't concern me just because I think you could probably find a Tellem connection to just about any candidate that you're having for the role, especially one that played in the NBA, because like that's where Arn operated. So I don't want to just make that generalization and be like mad about the hire right off the gate, because I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. Like I think Arn and Langdon obviously had a relationship, and you don't know what that is, but it could somehow benefit them. And if there's like a player that the team is interested in that is represented by one of Arn's kids, for example, they can get on intel calls and stuff like that. And I don't know. I'm just not like, I'm not ready to say it's a bad thing or anything, I guess, but I do think it's a valid question.
Well, what you brought up with Tellum's connections is a really good point. Because, guys, what we all got to understand with Arn is that he was the like original super agent. That guy and Wasserman Media Group, I believe it was called, they had like everybody of note in the NBA under their umbrella. So many so many players. It was just an incredibly large agency group. Still is really large. He's obviously exited and is now working with the Pistons. But like you said, because of that fact alone, it's going to be difficult to find guys that aren't in some way connected. At least, like that the 3 degrees of like Kevin Bacon or whatever. You could do that game with Arn Tellem to great success with as far as NBA players and NBA executives and coaches as well, because those guys are represented by agents too. So it's kind of just baked in at this point. And to Coffee's point here, can Langdon fire Tellem? No, Arn Tellem is a part owner with the Pistons. So I believe if Tom Gore has wanted to, he could buy him out. But I don't know why he would. Like, here's the other thing, and Omari said this on the Pistons Pulse. Like, having Arn Tellem in your organization, there's no way that the guy's not going to be involved in some capacity on basketball decisions, right? Because, like you said, he is so well connected. He does have insider information, personal like reads on so many of these guys through the various networks that he plays through. it's unavoidable. But he's not the lead decision maker. He hasn't been the lead decision maker for the past few years, and he's also not like mapped to basketball operations at all. He's on the business side. So, anytime that Arn's opinion is brought up, you could probably assume it was in some sense asked for. Uh so yeah, I'm with you. I am not worried at all about Arn Tellem and whatever influence he may or may not have in Detroit.
Yeah, and I don't want to just like assume like neither of us know Arn Tellem, obviously, but I do think when you're in this role, like I'll give a recent example. So outside, like I cover that WNBA as well, and Sue Bird just bought an ownership stake in the Seattle Storm. When she had her introductory press conference for that, she was asked like what role she would have with the players or how she sees herself with that because she's a recent player, a legend in the league. And her response is like, she's there to help, but she doesn't want to like step on people's toes. Like she's not just gonna butt into situations just because she thinks she knows. Like she wants to be asked for help. And I think like people in those scenarios that did a role for however long, however many years, and they go into more like advisory roles, ownership, whatever it may be. Like, I feel like I've heard that idea a lot that they're not going to like press or like just offer things because they want to let people succeed in their roles and find their own path. So I see a similar thing with like how Arn operates within the Pistons. I could be totally wrong because obviously I don't know like what's going on behind the scenes, but I'm assuming that that's the case.
Yeah, sorry for the gap there. I was just checking on the off chance if Monty Williams and Langdon have any overlap at some point, and it looks like that answer is no. Let me triple check. Yeah, no, no, they do not. So that's going to be another interesting one to follow here as well. And I know we're seeing a couple comments here talking about potential coaching candidates. You know what? Actually, we got a question about that. So why don't we just hit on it? But I want to ask you first before we do. What odds would you put on a new coach being brought in? And then once you answer that, if the Pistons do buy out Monty Williams, what are some names that you might have in mind?
Yeah, I'm kind of in terms of whether there's a new coach or not, I am sort of at 50-50 right now. I mean, I think I've just sort of been bucketing together like Troy's future and or thinking about Troy's future and Monty's future in the same light. And I just think Monty is much more likely to stick around than Troy. Could be wrong about that again. So Monty is just like a coin flip for me right now. I could see him sticking around and just saying like, yeah, absolutely horrible first year, like but maybe it was the roster you were given, like whatever. Like we don't Monty isn't like absolved of everything, but I could just see him being given another shot. I could also see them going a different way. Um, Johnny Boy brings up Chris Quinn. I think that's a great name. Like if there is a new coach, I would love to see the Pistons go for like an up and coming assistant who it seems like they were interviewing some of those guys when Monty was hired. So I think that might be the way to go just for every player or every coach is different, how they relate to locker rooms. But I have a question for you and this is a ton of recency bias with this new hire is like Willie Green's seat hot at all in New Orleans?
Conflicting reports. Some say it might be, some don't. I mean, I don't really think it should be. I think he's done a really good job for the Pelicans these past couple of years. But I mean, you're right. If it is, and if he gets moved, there's obviously a Langdon connection there. He was obviously part of the front office that hired him there in New Orleans.
Yeah, and the reason I ask is Willie Green went to University of Detroit, his numbers retired there. Detroit guy, I could see him being interested in the job, especially now with this connection too. Who knows? He has a head coaching job already. The other name that stuck out to me was Sam Cassell. I've heard and read that he's considered and thought of as a top assistant in the league. I know he's got some interviews for some of the head coaching cycles that are open right now. So, I mean, I think he's a guy that is going to get a shot eventually. And I wouldn't be mad if that shot was with the Pistons. That was similar to how I thought about Charles Lee, and now he has a job. But just another one of those guys that is going to be a head coach in this league eventually. And why not, based on where the state of this franchise and team is, give them that shot here in this situation. It won't be easy, but I think it might make more sense than going to get a seasoned coach who's maybe more fine-tuned or better suited to coach a contender.
Yeah. Let's see. I don't have names. I'm so bad with the coaching
Kenny
thing.
Atkinson.
I don't know if you guys remember. Yeah, but I don't know. Who knows what these guys
Mike and
are and are not
doing.
doing. Yes, Mike Inori's brought up a lot, and he's definitely a hot name right now. It's just think back to when Monty was hired, right? Everybody thought that was a home run.
Mm-hmm.
Now it was the worst decision ever, right? There's tons of hindsight 2020 going on here. And then on top of that, Monty Williams does still have a lot of history of being an above average to potentially very good NBA coach as well. I just don't know who's doing what in these coaching rooms. How influential is Chris Quinn? He might be a lot, but Eric Spoelstra's had that thing running very efficiently for a very long time now. Is that all? Is the recent success Chris Quinn? Is it still just on Spo? Does Spo just have a knack for bringing in people that can keep the ship, running smoothly? I have no idea. I feel very similarly with the even the hiring of Langdon, right? Because like we said, okay, David Griffin and the New Orleans Pelicans have targeted Trey Murphy the third. They've gotten Jordan Hawkins, Herb Jones, Zion Williamson. They've traded for CJ McCollum. They've made some shrewd free agency signings, but how much of that is Griffin? How much of that is Langdon? How much of that is someone else that we're not even talking about right now that the team is kind of keeping under wraps so that no one steals them? Who knows? It's just going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out. And to your point, I think a few weeks ago, I was probably 60-40 that Monty Williams would remain the coach, 40 that he'd be fired. There's no reason, there's no new information for me to change that position. So I'm going to stick with it, even though, it does kind of feel like a coin toss. I will say league wide, I'm just curious your thoughts on Mike Brown's kind of on a hot seat, I think. Bickerstaff obviously just got fired. There seems to be a lot of scapegoating of coaches going on right now. Is that the right move, to keep that position moving quickly through multiple NBA teams? Should there be a little more loyalty to the coaches? What's your take on all that?
Man, I feel bad for JB because I feel like he got scapegoated in Memphis too, a few years ago. But yeah, it's happening a lot. I mean, I think it makes sense in some situation. I mean, the Bucks firing Adrian Griffin in the middle of the season is still the craziest thing to me. I guess I get why they did, but it's just wild. I definitely understand it if a team underachieves in the playoffs and they need a soft reset to get things back on track. I mean, maybe moving on from the coach isn't the way to do that. I do think, though, there is some something to say about when you have a young team like the Pistons, a lot of young players who are looking to improve on how they just are as an NBA player, developing in their career. I do think consistency is important with that, but for consistency to make sense, like it has to be the right situation, and we can debate whether Monty Williams is the right person to lead that as well. So I don't know. I would say that having like turnover with your coach is definitely like, I feel like it only makes sense when you have players at certain points in their careers. I think the Pistons right now might be better suited for having one guy who's leading the locker room. And I mean, maybe there is an assistant that they want to promote or something like that, and you can maintain consistency there. But I think just for this team that the roster has been turnover, we're probably going to see some more roster turnover. I think for your main pieces, like your Cade Cunningham and whoever else you're keeping alongside him, keeping some form of consistency is important, but with the caveat that maybe you do need to like make a change now and then like build something that's consistent and efficient in the future.
And reporting from The Athletic that I read just now, from Shams and obviously our guy James Edwards
We're doing
III,
so
is
much
that
multitasking right now.
yeah, I know. I know. This is a first for us, so it's a lot of fun. But the decision on both Monty Williams and Troy Weaver fully falls at the feet of Trajan Langdon. Whatever he wants to do is what's going to happen. Sounds like there's a rumor that, maybe in the next week the contract will be officially signed and he'll actually get to start moving on on those decisions. But for everyone still wondering if, is Weaver still going to have a lot of influence? Is, Arn Tellem or gosh, Ed Stefanski, whoever, Tom Gore's going to have influence over the decisions that Langdon's going to make here? Quick answer is no. Sounds like everything is falling directly at his feet on what happens in the immediate future for the two figureheads of Detroit basketball last season, for better or for worse.
Yeah. And I also have to quickly shout out Rock Howard here in the chat. I found out
Yes.
that Trajan Langdon's nickname is the Alaskan Assassin as well. And that's an awesome nickname. Yeah, he
I think
like
he's from Anchorage.
he grew up there, went to high school there, and then went on to be a star athlete at Duke and multiple sports. So yeah, we're gonna keep that nickname and definitely use it in the future.
Oh, for sure. I love the nickname. Let's get into this question here from our guy Dave Giancola. He wants to know if we got any thoughts on Jarrett Allen as a target here for the Pistons this offseason. It seems like maybe Cleveland is open to breaking up their core a little bit. So, what do you think about Jarrett Allen potentially as a target for the Pistons? And is there anything that they could even really offer the Cavs that they might want?
I mean, I think they could offer the fifth pick. Like, I think a Jarrett Allen deal might, if you're bringing back like a legit player with a pick or a young piece, like Jarrett Allen might be a good name to keep an eye on. Maybe just the pick or just the player isn't all that gets it done. So you might have to be willing to give up multiple pieces, future picks, whatever it might be. Um, I think the Cavs would potentially be interested in something like this. I saw that they were considering like an extension for Evan Mobley, building around him. They're hoping that Donovan Mitchell stays. So if they are going to shift anything, like that would tell you that Jarrett Allen is maybe the not expendable piece, but one that you might be more willing to give up on if they want to take a shot at a top 5 player in this draft. If they think Jaden Ivey could work next to Donovan Mitchell, like something like that. And Jarrett Allen definitely addresses a need for the Pistons as well. So I'm all for it. I think he's on the short list of names I would target in a trade this offseason. And maybe even like surrounding the draft. So interested to hear if you're aligned or if you would stay away.
Yeah, this one's kind of tough. So, I mean, obviously on this podcast, we have talked plenty about the Pistons' need for rim protection, and Jarrett Allen is on the short list of one of the best in the NBA. I mean, maybe top 3 or top 4. He's that good, and he's been that good for years now. He's really consistent. So, as a player, man, I love Jarrett Allen. He would be a great addition to the team. Huge upgrade over what the Pistons had gotten recently out of Jalen Duren. The problem is that I don't know if I were the Cavs that I'd be all that interested in what the Pistons have to offer, unless we're gonna expand this out to like a 3-team deal, where, you know, potentially the Cavs could add a guy like Kyle Kuzma, I think would be a good target for them, who apparently, you know, may be up for grabs this offseason too. But yeah, if I'm the Cavs, like they want to take another step. They want to get past the second round. They want to become true contenders. And if they're going to move one of these core guys in order to do that and take that step, I don't want a top 5 pick. I don't want, you know, a swing at Jaden Ivey or Jalen Duren or Sar Thompson. I want a guy that can help and that fits my roster now. So, you know, if I'm the Cavs, I'd be looking for a very good wing who fits pretty seamlessly next to either Donovan Mitchell or Darius Garland. If it were me, I'd be picking Donovan Mitchell, but obviously that comes with a whole different, you know, bag of badgers, right? That would be unleashed if you decide to go that route. And Evan Mobley. So, you know, like Brandon Ingram would be a good fit for them. I mentioned Kyle Kuzma, just wings who are big and can score the basketball would be really helpful out there in Cleveland. Pistons don't have that. We've been complaining all season that there's just no wings on this roster worth much of anything. And I love Fontecchio, but that's not moving the needle for me if I'm Cleveland. So, yeah, like would I love the Pistons to pursue it? Absolutely. It probably just has to be a 3-teamer because I don't know how else it would get done.
I have a question. What if Zachary Risachet falls to 5? Cleveland wants him. He's one of the more like immediate, not a finished product by any means, but you know he can shoot the ball. You know he can defend. Would you trade, in theory, like Zachary Risachet for Jarrett Allen? And I'm assuming the Pistons would have to add something, but what would you do that, or would you rather like take the young prospect?
Well, the Pistons, like you said, would probably have to add something to that. I would be open to it if I were the Pistons, but again, if I'm the Cavs, like I'm not sure Risachet is a day one starter. Personally, I think he'd benefit from coming off the bench right away, kind of protect him a little bit, let him develop at his own pace. I do buy into the shot. I think the defense is going to be a little bit more of a work in progress than people think, especially with where his strength is at right now. Like he's not a guy that's profiling, you know, to the level of a defender as, you know, an Asar Thompson, Herb Jones, Kawhi Leonard, all these guys that were incredible defenders coming out of college or out of the overtime elite. In the case of Asar Thompson, like Risachet's not profiling like that. He's looking really solid. He's looking like he's going to be a good defender, not a game changing defender. And I think that is going to take a little bit of time. So again, like if I'm the Cavs, I'd need a lot more. I
Yeah.
wouldn't just want the shot at Risachet. Do you disagree, by the way, with anything that I said about Zachary Risachet there? Do you think maybe he's more plug and play, or do you agree that maybe he'd benefit from, you know, a little slower approach?
Since the reason I brought his name up is because like I feel like other wings like Cody Williams, Tijan Solon, Modest Buzelis, like they're
Ron
more
Holland.
Ron Holland, like they're more like upside swings to me where I know like Risachet can at least do a couple of things. Can he do it um like to the most of his ability year one? Probably not, but I don't know. I think there's could be a world where if he slips, a team could see him as like a player that they could it plays off ball, is fairly low maintenance, and can knock shots down and defend a little bit. So that's like the one name I could potentially see Cleveland be interested in moving up the top of the draft. But other than that, I'm with you. I don't really see them wanting to considerably move up. And yeah, I think if there is a Jarrett Allen trade, like I think what you were insinuating is like the package that the Pistons would have to give up is probably more than people are thinking, which I mean makes sense. Jarrett Allen was an all-star, one of the best like rim protectors in the league. But yeah, like is it too much to stomach? Like, I don't know.
All right, let's stick on the wing here for a second. And Blake, I'm sorry, we're gonna finally do it. Let's have the discussion about Cody Williams and why we both have him collectively much lower on our board than it seems like at least some fans currently do. So KCP for 3 in the DBB comments. We appreciate you, my guy. He says that he hopes Cody Williams is being prioritized at pick number 5. Says he can defend, he has size, he can shoot, he can get to the rim, he handles the ball, and of course he's got that pedigree with Jalen Williams, his brother, already being with the Thunder and excelling. So, what I want to ask you is, why are we not buying what KCP for 3 is selling here? Why is he a little lower for us than maybe the collective?
You know what? I have to give KCP some props here because this question made me do a little more, like watch some Cody Williams more than I have in a while. But I think why I was a little bit lower on him as we've gotten closer and closer to the draft is he just like didn't he fought through a few injuries in his freshman season. None are serious, but they caused him to miss some time. And then when he came back, it took some time to adjust. He took an elbow to a face and missed some time with that, came back with a mass. Like, did that have any impact on his play? But it just felt like to me there were times, especially towards the end of the season and into Colorado's postseason, where he just wasn't very impactful on the floor. And I have to caveat that by saying like Cody Williams he's one of the more like raw wing prospects that you're going to be taking. Like he has the size, he has the length, he has the skills, but it's just about like developing those. He needs to add some more strength. Like, can he do that? And I think he was a little bit of a product of, for me at least, like there were all these other guys that were balling in March Madness, balling overseas, doing like look good at the combine, things like that, where I just like they just like jump Cody Williams for me. And I still think that he's an intriguing prospect. And yeah, YouTube user brings up here that Colorado had 3 likely first round picks and their team was bad. And there's no way they're all legit NBA players. Like, I think there is something to that, but I think there were just a lot of mouths to feed in Colorado as well. And like, it's definitely a concern that Cody was sometimes like invisible on the floor. But the thing with him is he has like great touch near the rim. The question, we know he can shoot it. Just like the question is he shot efficiently, but on low volume. So like, how does that translate? But I don't know. He's an interesting pick. I think he's obviously going to be in the discussion, but it's just like, are there other prospects that are better right now and potentially have better upside? And for me right now, the answer to that is yes. But I don't know. Maybe I need to like dive even deeper into Cody to see if I'm like missing anything.
Yeah, all right. So I have Cody Williams sitting at number 13 for me right now. So that's pretty solidly out of like consideration at the top 5. And what I will say isn't like I don't feel like it's all that fair to the guy because, like you said, he did battle through a lot of injuries and a lot of just non-ideal situations in Colorado this past season. but it is fair in some capacity to question the wiring, the way that he played. He just wasn't aggressive. He was pretty passive. He would turn down open threes, dribble into long twos. He does have great touch around the rim. And you brought up the jump shot, right? I mean, the percentage looks great. It's 42% from three, but the release is very slow. It's very mechanical. His footwork was a little all over the place, and he only shot 41 3-point attempts on the entire season. So, like, not only are you dealing with a small sample size, but you're also dealing with a small sample size in part due because he was turning down open shots, which is just a big red flag for me. So I also, I wasn't totally convinced with the ball handling. I think it's okay. He's got a lot of work to do there. Like, he's not gonna. I don't expect him to be beating NBA defenders in isolation, right? Maybe he can handle a handoff or two here and there, but I think that's pretty much a work in progress. The defense I did like. He did routinely try to pick out the opposing team's best player and try to check him out there on the perimeter, especially early on in the season when he was playing more. But it's not like he excelled when he did that. He still struggled on ball as a defender. He's not the quickest guy. You mentioned the strength. He's real light, real wiry. And, yeah, if you told me that he's going to be like his brother and put on, like, what, 15 pounds of legitimate muscle to his frame within 1 year in the NBA, like, okay, yeah, I'd be a little more excited. But just because his brother didn't doesn't mean he's going to. Brothers are very different. Siblings are very different. That's not necessarily how it works. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
I'm a little lower. The idea of him's great. He's just pretty far from the idea of him.
yeah. I can say this about Cody. I can say this about so many players, so it's not just about Cody. Like, I just really wish he played in the scrimmages at the combine. Like, his brother, like Jalen Williams, caught a lot of eyes in the 5-on-5s at the combine, and that's kind of how he shot up boards. So, just especially because like the late season for Cody, and again, just to like caveat it, he was coming back from injury, so he was dealing with something. But his last handful, few games, whatever they were, left a lot to be desired. So I wish we just got some more of that. I mean, I brought this up when we had Bryce on last week. Like, there was some stuff floating around social media that Cody stayed in the gym even when he wasn't getting his like measurements taken or working out at the combine. So he definitely seems like he like loves basketball and is like always in the gym trying to get better and things like that. But for me with Cody, it's like I still like him and I think he can be a good player, and his archetype is like exactly the kind that the Pistons need. I just feel like there's other prospects that I like a little more right now.
Right. And if you look at, after Zachary Risachet, right, the, wing or forward prospects that most people kind of see pushing up into the higher end of the lottery are guys like Ron Holland, Cody Williams, and Tijon Salon. Now, of those three, I would say that you could pretty confidently bank on Salon and Holland playing very aggressively, at least on defense, playing with a high motor, trying to do the little things, cutting off ball really well, finding ways to get open and to ideally score, but at least get shot attempts that aren't self created. And Cody Williams didn't show that at Colorado. He didn't show that. So at this point, I just have him a little bit lower than those two. And if anyone right now is listening and thinking Matas Buzelis, he's not a wing. Matas is a big. And I'm going to leave it at that. Final thoughts on Cody Williams before we move on.
No, I think we can really leave it there. I mean, I'd be interested. I mean, we have front office changes going on right now, obviously, so I don't know what it's going to be like. But Troy, like, kind of kept under wraps, like, who was coming in for workouts and things like that. So I'm gonna try to like keep an eye on social media to see what if anything pops up on teams like bringing in Cody. I know there was some posts about like him doing a pro day and stuff, but like he's a player where I'm like really interested in that stuff because I'm like, what else is gonna make me like move him up my board at this point? So I want to keep an eye on. Like I like him. He's just not he he should be in the conversation for me at 5, but I would say he's like much lower compared to other prospects.
Yeah, and like, if you take a swing on him at 13, right, late in the lottery, I think you feel pretty excited and pretty comfortable about it. The problem's just pushing all the way up to number 5, right?
Oh,
Chili David, really quick, gotta shout him out because now he's my guy. He's out here talking my language, saying Tidjon Salon is the sleeper pick for Detroit. And I agree. I love that kid. I think he's a great player, good prospect. But let's move on to some Klingon talk here, which we did touch on a little bit last week with Bryce. But let's go on to this one. This is from a guy, Bobby Buckets, in the DBB comments. He says, and this is to preface based on a video going around of Klingan shooting some nice open pick and pop looks in an empty gym. Said, let's say scouting departments across the NBA mutually project that Donovan Clingan is someone who could be a 35% three-point shooter in the future. Where does he land on your board if that's the case?
man, like pretty high, like right after Alex Sarr, I guess I would say. Like I I've been trying to debate whether for the Pistons, say there's like an ideal prospect that is a 3-and-D wing, and then you also have a prospect that's at the same talent level, has the same upside, that is a stretch big. Like both of those will like immensely benefit the team. I think having, even though like both roles are hard to come by, I think having a 5-man that can space the floor is especially hard to come by. Like a lot of guys, like using Brooke Lopez for the example, he didn't find it until much later on in his career. So if we know that Klingan's going to do that, I think he should be in very strong consideration, if not the top guy on your board. Like my issue with the whole buzz about Klingan shooting it right now is we just didn't see that happen. Like he took 6 threes his past season at Connecticut. He made 2 of them, which isn't bad, but other than that, like you look at, he just has never really had that in his game. And I don't know. I understand what his camp is doing and like why they're working him out this way. Like that's what I would definitely do if I was his coach, because I mean in the system he was playing in, he didn't like have that role. Like maybe it is a part of his game. So if I was whatever, the guy working him out in the combine, I would definitely tell him to like shoot the 3 for all the scouts, because that's probably something he wasn't able to show off a lot. I'm just like not sure how convinced I am that it is a part of his game, since I haven't seen it. But if you can tell me that it is, he can be a league average 3-point shooter from 7-1, 7-2 as your big man, like I'm all in.
Yeah, if by some miracle he's going to shoot 35% from three, you can move him right up there with Alex R. The problem is, like you said, it's just not gonna happen. Like, all right, you look at his free throw percentage over his 2 seasons at Connecticut. His freshman year, he didn't shoot any 3-pointers. He shot 2 free throws per game, though, 52%. This past season, he shot 4 free throws a game, which is a pretty good number, especially for a low usage big like him, 58%. Like, okay, it went up, but it's still below 60. And if you guys want to do this on your own at home, go back and try to find college free throw shooters who shot under 60% from the free throw line and see what they've done in the NBA as 3-point shooters. I'll just say it's not good. There are some outliers, but it's not very good, which is why a lot of scouts talk about the free throw percentage being a pretty good indicator of a guy's potential to shoot one day. So, like, I'm with you. All right. If we're his camp, yes, absolutely. You're already getting Brooke Lopez comparisons. You may as well steer into it. Get a surefire NBA basketball player, one of the best basketball players in the entire world, in an open gym, and let him shoot a catch and shoot three as slow as he wants. It's going to go in because he is one of the best basketball players in the world in an empty gym with like 5 scouts on the sideline. He's going to make more than he misses. That's just how it goes. Does that mean it's going to translate into actual game action in the NBA? No, I'm not betting on it at all. And I do wish that when we were talking about Clingan, that more people, when they make that Brooke Lopez comp, would talk about early Brooke Lopez, Nets Brooke Lopez, before he started shooting. Because that was still a good player, guys. That was still like a borderline all-star, blocked a ton of shots, great two-way basketball player. Like, he doesn't have to shoot to be really good. And I think he is going to be really good. I just don't think he's going to shoot the basketball.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, I think just going back to, I guess they're kind of my draft pillars for the Pistons this year. Someone who can shoot or someone who can protect the rim. Ideally both. I know Clingan for sure does one. If you're telling me he can do both, like, yeah, that's a no-brainer. But you still know he can protect the rim, play defense, can operate in pick and rolls. Like, he still has to be pretty high on your board if he's there. I could understand if they would prioritize like a wing or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I still think Clingan's a good player, even if he doesn't shoot it right away. Or, I mean, he might never. That's a very real possibility.
Yeah, and like you said, he's going to block shots. Like, there aren't a ton of guys in this draft class that you could look at and say, okay, I can promise you with nearly 100% certainty that they will entirely plug a major roster problem for the Detroit Pistons. Donovan Clingan would do that because Donovan Clingan is 7'2". He's massive. He's got long arms and he's pretty athletic. So he's going to block some shots like that.
Yeah.
That is a big, you could check that box off, rim protection added, and you can call it a day there. So yeah, he's a very good prospect. And I understand why a lot of Pistons fans want him even at 5 and why some teams are even considering him even higher than that. So let's do a Steph Castle question really quickly because 313 Pistons brings up that Steph Castle apparently showed off a better looking jump shot at the combine. So do you think that maybe Steph Castle is a guy that could become a better 3-point shooter one day? And because this came up on the Pistons Pulse with Stephen Gillespie, and guys, great episode. If you guys haven't listened to that, please do. He's awesome from those ceilings. Those guys do great work over there as well. So read them too. But he was actually talking about Steph Castle as a potential scorer, like a guy that has big time scoring upside, not just shooting, not just finishing, like an entire package as a guy that could really put up numbers as a scorer. So, what do you think about that? What do you think about his jump shot? Give a little bit of insight in Steph Castle.
Yeah, he did shoot the ball well in drills at the combine, which definitely made you a little intrigued because he didn't shoot the ball well in his season at UConn. And yeah, also I listened to the Pistons Pulse earlier and it was great. Big fan of Stevens, big fan of No Ceiling. So if you guys aren't checking them out already, be sure to do that. But yeah,
Plus, I made some fantastic mock draft
you
picks. Like, we
did.
just got to pat me on the back. I was incredible. No notes at all. No, I'm kidding. It was a good episode. Go listen.
It was great. It was great. And you did make some good picks. But no, I feel my mind is going to like comparing our conversation that we just had about Clingan to Castle, because like Clingan has never showed in really like any level of basketball that he can shoot the three. Castle has. And yeah, YouTube user brings it up in the chat. Like Castle was hesitant this season at UConn. He turned away some shots. Yeah, that's very fair. I'm concerned about whether he can shoot it as well. I don't think he's gonna miraculously come into the league and like shoot it well right away. I just know that he has shown flashes as a 3-point shooter before. So what he said at the combine that he knows he can shoot and his numbers and his freshman year shouldn't keep him down. Like, I get that, but it's still, his shot is very much a question. And there is all that smoke about how Castle only wants to play for a team that doesn't have a point guard. So I don't know what to think about that whole thing. But I don't know. I could see, the thing I know about Steph Castle is he's always going to like work hard defensively, and he's going to probably be your best. I don't know because you have Asar Thompson, but a really good perimeter defender on day one. And I think that is a great player to put next to Cade Cunningham defensively. The question is he going to be able to shoot it and help space the floor for Cade on the other end? If he doesn't, you probably can't play him next to Asar Thompson. You probably have to play him alongside a big man who can stretch the floor at least somewhat. And like that brings in like roster questions. So I don't know. Like, I really like Castle as a prospect, as a player, and I think he can shoot the ball. It's just like, is it going to translate? Like, was this freshman year an anomaly? And like, he's shown at the combine that there is a shooter somewhere in there, but like, what's going to help unlock that at a higher level, depending on what it looks like. So I think it can. I'm just not sure if the shot will ever like fully come around. He'll be like this insane 3-point shooter.
The one thing he has going for him is that he was at just about 76% from the free throw line on pretty good attempts. He got to the line fairly frequently. Again, as a guy that wasn't necessarily featured in that offense. So he didn't shoot it well. YouTube user, you're right. He turned down a lot of open looks. That concerns me as well. And, the shot doesn't look incredible. There's probably some changes that are going to have to be made there for him to eventually become a good 3-point shooter. It's possible. Definitely not in year one, is what I'd say. Definitely not in year one. The one thing, though, that, I've been thinking about with this draft in general, and this is something I've kind of come around to more recently, is that the draft doesn't need to fix the Pistons' spacing issues. You could draft a guy like Steph Castle. If you really think Steph Castle is the best player on the board there at 5, if you want to add him to the roster, okay, great. That's going to mean that you need to make some changes elsewhere, and that's fine. You can do that. Like you can make those dominoes fall so that Steph Castle now makes sense on the roster in the starting lineup, next to Cade Cunningham and next to a bunch of 3-and-D players. Like you aren't boxed into Reed Shepherd because he shot 50% from 3-point range in college. You're not boxed into Dalton Connect because he's a great shooter and a great scorer. You can just take the guy you think's going to be the best, and you can move other people and try to figure it out that way. It's kind of that mentality, like, yes, the Pistons really shouldn't have more young players on the roster than they did this past season, but they don't have to be the same young players. You know what I mean? You could get different young players. So like, do you want to add another first round pick in this year's draft? I probably wouldn't, but if that's a route that they go, all right, well now, maybe Sasser's got to go too, or maybe Turner, or maybe Ivy, or Stewart even. Like, make the other dominoes fall to make it make sense, but you're not locked into what this team is right now. And that was just kind of I don't know, like a little change in philosophy I guess I had, because I was right there with you. Like, okay, if they can't shoot the basketball, I'm not considering them. But they don't have to fix that. Whoever they draft right now, they don't have to fix that. The new GM, Trajan Langdon, he has to fix it some way. Doesn't have to be in June.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Like, I think how I've been thinking about it is if you're thinking of those young pieces, let's just say the Cade, Asar, Duran, Ivy, and this draft pick, loop Isaiah Stewart in if you want, but he's more on the outside for this frame of thought for me. Like, I don't think that you can keep all of those around. And like, I think you need to move on from a minimum of one, whether it's the draft pick, whether it's a player, whatever it might be. Like, you need to move on from one to help make the rest of the roster work, to help maximize Cade Cunningham, put the proper pieces around him, because it's clear that that's not the case right now. And you're not giving up Cade Cunningham either. So it's like one of the other dominoes has to fall. So I don't know whether there is like a trade back scenario that brings you a player or future draft capital for trading down a few spots and you still get a guy that fits the roster well, like, okay, but you just have to do something to make this team better. I mean, it sounds so silly and like obvious to say something like that, but it's just clear that your current pieces aren't fully complementary right now, so you have to use those to go out and find something that works a little bit better. And yeah, it's Trajan Langdon's job now.
Yeah, and the one thing I've kind of been forced to really accept now as we've been looking forward into the offseason is that, like, they won 14 games last year. That is about as bottom of the barrel as you could get. Like, this is going to be messy. It's not gonna be clean, and someone, now Trajan Langdon, we know, who was just hired, he has to clean it up. He has to put the fire out and build from the ashes, because that's where they're at right now. It is burned down. It is in ashes. They are at the bottom. So, again, do they have to solve all their problems with the draft pick? No. Take the best guy that's on the board. I've kind of come off my fixation on fit. The only fit I care about is with Cade Cunningham, and I assume we're probably going to end up talking about that on another episode. But our guy Derek Brooks asked a fantastic question for us to end on. He says, "Not sure if you guys already answered this, but ignoring the Pistons' needs and knowing what the Pelicans have done in the draft these past few years, what might be Trajan Langdon's big board right now? So why don't you just take a wild guess based on very little, because we do have very little to go on a few guys that you think Langdon might really like, just based on that Pelicans draft history. This
Yeah.
might be a David Griffin thing, but let's have fun with it."
And shout out to you, Derek. Great question. I'm not gonna cheat. I was thinking of cheating and just giving you an like all wings draft board because that's just kind of what the Pelicans are to me. That's like what they have. But they did take Jordan Hawkins last year, who is the best shooter in the draft. So I think for me, I am gonna prioritize wings. So listen, like Donovan Clingan is up there on the draft board, but totally based on what Trajan Langdon has done in the past, like this is what I would see it shaking out as immediately. Definitely have to tweak it a bit, but like Reese Shea, Ron Holland, Buzelis, Cody Williams, and then I just have to put like Reed Shepard in there because of his shot, and Solon isn't that far behind. He might even be before like Buzelis or Holland for me, but that's like an immediate group I could see them focusing on.
Yeah, I was looking primarily at the wings too. So just to add some other names, I do think Reed Shepherd could end up being pretty highly considered. You mentioned Jordan Hawkins, but they also in New Orleans did make a trade for CJ McCollum. Maybe that's a role that you could kind of see Reed Shepherd playing one day if you really expand his shot diet. So maybe that's something. In the same vein, I mean, I'm not really high on the guy, but Rob Dillingham, great scorer, good shooter. That could be a fit
He's a
kind of in the
great
same
fit
mold.
for New Orleans, by the way. Sorry to interrupt you,
He
but
is.
like
No, he is.
that might mean something, it might not.
Yeah, he really is. And in terms of some of the bigs or the wings, you're right to bring up Clingan. Valanciunas was a guy that New Orleans had prioritized previously. Clingan could fall into that kind of role. But just looking at the draft history, I think the one thing that really sticks out is the type of wings they had been drafting. So your Dyson Daniels, who really plays more of a guard, but he does occasionally play up as a wing. Herb Jones, Trey Murphy. These are all guys with like motors that run through the roof, motors that go so hot. They play so hard every second that they're out on the floor. And the two guys that I think really do fit that are Tidjon Salon and Ron Holland. I mean, it'd be a disservice not to mention Zachary Risachet in this because he is one of the better shooters in the draft. He's a tall 3-and-D guy. Uh, Someone actually, Bryce told me this. A few people he had talked to said that Trey Murphy might even be a comp, a less athletic Trey Murphy for Risachet. So there's that. But I do think Salon, with how aggressively he plays on both ends, I think that's a very good fit with kind of that Herb Jones, Dyson Daniels mold. Same thing with Ron Holland. So I think you were right to bring up those two guys. Is there anybody else before we close it out that you think maybe could be a fit? Like your guy De Silva, Tristan De Silva, that could be a good one.
Yeah.
Filipowski, maybe Devin Carter.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I mean, they did have Valanciunas. Like, there were nights every now and then where Valanciunas made 5 threes out of nowhere. Like, maybe the philosophy is having a big who can at least somewhat stretch the floor, and that would be your Filipowski, Day'Ron Holmes, Tyler Smith. The one that I was thinking through as you were talking is like Dyson Daniels kind of reminds me of Steph Castle defensively, like totally different offensive game,
I
but
can
like
definitely see that.
it, kind of close. So that's another Steph Castle would I guess be another name that should be on the board in that frame of thinking.
Here, how about a little bit of an off the wall one? Zach Edey,
Oh,
just for how efficiently he can score in the paint. Possibly, he has partial claim to best screen setter in the draft, just because he is so massive and he's pretty coordinated. And I do think he's a little underrated as a passer, especially in the short roll. And obviously a very good defender, blocks a lot of shots for his size. Clingan and Edey. I mean, Clingan can move a lot better than Edey. I know they didn't test that way, but the film says that Clingan can move a lot better than Edey. Both of those guys, those are pure drop bigs, and so was Valanciunas. So if you want a guy that's even bigger, that has a little more shooting potential than Donovan Clingan does, because Edey already has kind of popped it out to the mid range a little bit here, and he was a pretty good free throw shooter. Maybe that's a fit there for that Valanciunas role. I don't know at 5,
oh yeah,
but
no, please no. There will be anarchy, but I mean, hey, if
the
you
streets will burn.
if you trade back or something like that, like it's a name that should be on the board. And then just to throw a few more wings out there, there's like Johnny Furphy, Keyshawn George, Dylan Jones. Like there's a bunch of names that make sense. That I'm just like cheating and calling out wings now, but like that's where my mind is immediately, like an hour after we found out about this hiring.
And YouTube user says about Edey, he says if Zach Edey is in the lottery on anybody's board, he is out on the evaluation. And
Hey,
YouTube
thankfully
user,
he's
let me tell
not
you.
there on mine, so I'm in the
Well,
clear.
I have him literally in the last lottery position at
Oh,
14,
you're
personally. But what I will say, and this isn't any insider info or anything, because you could read this. There have been a few people who have said this, but I do firmly believe Zach Edey's going to go a lot higher than people think. I just do.
I think he was in that last slot, I think to the Blazers at 14 in ESPN's new mock. There were a lot of
I
picks
think so,
there
yeah.
that were like eye-opening to me, and that's like, does that mean something? I don't know. Maybe it does. So yeah, I mean, Edey definitely isn't in my top 14 like big board, but I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up going in the lottery or someone like trades up for him or something like that, which would have totally shocked me maybe like a month or two ago. But yeah, I won't be surprised come draft night.
I think his production is just insane. Like all it takes is somebody to have a team that's set up to run drop coverage on defense and is willing to kind of buy in to his potential as at least a mid-range shooter. Like that's all it takes. Those are two very minor things. There are plenty of teams that already run drop coverage almost exclusively, and he did show quite a bit of juice as a mid-range shooter. So look, he's not going to be your primary scorer or anything right at the NBA level, but he's so much bigger than Luka Garza. Hang on, I'm sorry. I'm just seeing this up now. YouTube user brings up the Luka Garza comp, says that Luka Garza had similar arguments. Luka Garza is like 6 inches shorter and maybe 50 pounds lighter, even even at his college weight. Like Zach Edey is so much bigger, was a much better scorer, was much more efficient, and his tournament numbers were through the roof. So yeah, I would not bring up Luka Garza in any capacity with Zach Edey, but I think we got to wrap it up there. Surprising ending to a show that starts with Trajan Langdon, ends up with Zach Edey talk for the Pistons. That was not planned, and I don't think we could have planned that if we tried. But thank you everybody for tuning in. It was fun to actually break some news here on the podcast. I think that's a first for us, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't been online when anything happened. I know the Pistons Pulse was, I think when it was the Gallinari Muscala trade. That
Yep. Yeah,
that
we
was
had Keith Smith on too, which was just like stroke of genius. We could
that
not have
was
planned that one
fun.
better if we tried.
That was fun listening to it, but this is a first for us. Yeah, like I said, I sat down at my computer and looked at my phone and got the notification that the hire was made. So appreciate everyone listening to us as we work through our instant thoughts and everything like that. We'll definitely talk about the hire of Trajan Langdon some more next week, as well as plenty more draft. Reminder, feel free to call our phone line to ask a question and hear your voice on the show. The number for that is 313-355-2717. And special thanks to our guy, Sean Corp, managing editor at Detroit Bad Boys, for supporting the show. And shout out to you guys for the great questions and talking points tonight. We'll catch you next week, whether on your commute or live with us on YouTube. We can't wait to talk more Detroit basketball with you all.